The sound that finally broke the architecture of our marriage wasn't a shout, it was a laugh. A casual, confident laugh that traveled down the short hallway of our Baltimore Row home, slipping under the door of the guest room where I was folding a basket of his white undershirts. It was the kind of laugh that says we don't have to whisper. The kind that assumes privacy not because no one is home, but because the person who is home doesn't count. The sound was followed by a sentence, carried on the tinny signal of a speakerphone, and the words landed in the quiet room, not like a bomb, but like a piece of code executing a command I hadn't written, revealing a fatal, structural flaw in the entire system. My name is Camille. I am 34 years old, and for the last 10 of them, 7 as his wife, I had been with Wesley. Long enough that the foundation of our life felt like bedrock, permanent and unmovable. I'm a software engineer. I spend my days designing systems, writing logical pathways, and hunting for bugs. I believe in architecture, in the invisible scaffolding that holds things up. A good system is resilient. It can handle unexpected inputs and scale under pressure. A bad system looks fine on the surface, but it's built on bad assumptions and hidden dependencies. For years, I had treated our marriage like my most important project, constantly running diagnostics, patching vulnerabilities, and optimizing for performance. I thought we were building something solid. I didn't realize I was the only one on the development team. I didn't realize the system was designed to run on the single, unsustainable resource of my patience. The inciting wound, the line of code that caused the system to crash, came on a Tuesday. It was unremarkable, gray, and damp outside. I was working from home, and Wesley had come back early from his workshop. He ran a custom carpentry business, a passion that had become a career, largely because I had built the digital infrastructure that made it viable. He was in the living room, on the phone with his best friend, Jerome. I could hear the low murmur of their conversation, the familiar cadence of men talking about nothing important, a basketball game, weekend plans, the merits of one brand of bourbon over another. I was only half listening, my mind on a stubborn bug in a user authentication module I was building for my actual job. Then, through the easy rumble of their conversation, I heard Jerome's voice, clearer now. You sure Camille's cool with you heading to the Poconos for that boys' weekend? Didn't you guys have a thing? There was a pause. And then, the laugh. It was rich and unbothered, full of a certainty I suddenly realized I had never been allowed to feel. Man, please, Wesley said, and the sound of his smile was audible. She'll never leave. He let the statement hang in the air for a beat, a little trophy he was polishing for his friend. Then he delivered the kill shot, the part that explained everything. Where's she gonna go? It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of my geography. My world, in his estimation, was a closed loop. It began and ended within the walls he provided, the life he curated, the stability he believed was his sole creation. The words didn't accuse me of being weak or incapable. They were worse. They erased the possibility of my strength entirely. They framed me as a feature of his life, a pre-installed application that couldn't be deleted. Where would I go? I had a 6-figure salary. I had a mind that built worlds out of logic and light. I had friends who loved me. I had a family that was my anchor. I had a whole world inside of me that he had stopped visiting years ago. But in the casual, confident architecture of his worldview, I had nowhere to go. I was just here, a permanent fixture in the house he owned. And in that moment, listening to the echo of his certainty, I realized he was right about one thing. The Camille he was talking about, the woman who absorbed his needs and managed his life and patched the holes in his business, that woman would never leave. She had nowhere to go because she didn't really exist. She was a user profile I had created for his benefit. And my job, I understood with a clarity that was as cold and hard as glass, was to delete the account. The archaeology of our disrespect began, as it so often does, with love. In the beginning, my skills were a gift. Wesley had the talent. His hands could turn a block of raw walnut into a table that felt like it had a soul, but he didn't have the first idea how to turn that talent into a business. He was working out of our garage, taking cash jobs from friends, his genius trapped by his lack of organization. "You're the smart one," he'd say, wrapping his arms around my waist while I sat at my laptop, long after my own workday was over. "Can you just make it make sense?" So I did. I spent a month of evenings and 2 entire weekends building him a website from scratch. A clean, beautiful portfolio with a custom e-commerce back-end, an integrated scheduling tool for consultations, and a secure payment gateway. I wrote every line of code. I optimized every image. I taught myself search engine optimization and got his site to the first page of Google for custom furniture Baltimore. I built him an invoicing system that automatically sent reminders, a client database, a whole digital scaffolding to hold his talent. He was overjoyed. He paraded me around to his family and friends, the brilliant girlfriend who had built his empire. It felt good. It felt like partnership. I was the logic. He was the art. We were a complete system. The first sign of erosion, the first hairline crack in the foundation, happened about a year into the website being live. We were at my friend Maya's wedding, a beautiful affair at an old manor house out in the countryside. We were dressed up sipping champagne. During the cocktail hour, my phone buzzed in my clutch. It was a text from Wesley. Then another, and another. I excused myself. "Babe, the site's down," he whispered urgently into the phone when I called him from a quiet hallway. "A guy from DC wants to place a $10,000 order and he says the payment page is throwing an error." "Okay, breathe," I said, my mind already spinning, flipping through the code in my head. "What's the error message?" He didn't know. He just knew it was broken. "Can you fix it real quick?" he asked, his voice tight with panic. Real quick. The 2 words that would come to define my unpaid, uncredited role as his personal IT department. I looked down at my silk dress, at the string trio playing Vivaldi in the next room. My friend was about to have her first dance. I took a deep breath. "I don't have my laptop, Wes." "Use your phone," he said, not as a suggestion, but as an instruction. "Please, Camille, this is a huge order." So I did. I spent the next 9 minutes, which felt like an hour, huddled in a marble bathroom stall, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filtering through the door. I balanced my phone on my knee, remotely logged into the server, and pulled up the raw code. It was a deprecated plugin, a conflict from a recent server update. My thumbs flew across the tiny screen, commenting out the bad code, pushing a temporary fix, and restarting the server. I tested it myself, navigating to the payment page. It loaded. I texted him, "Should be working now." His reply came 30 seconds later. "Thanks, babe. He just placed the order. You're the best." I walked out of the bathroom and back to the party. Wesley was standing by the bar, laughing with a group of his friends, phone already back in his pocket. He saw me, smiled, and gave me a little thumbs up from across the room. He didn't come over. He didn't thank me in person. He didn't seem to register that I had just performed a small, high-stress technical miracle from a toilet stall in my formal wear. The system was back online. The transaction was complete. My function had been performed. I felt a strange, hollow feeling in my chest. I had just saved him thousands of dollars, and my reward was a thumbs up. The role of partner was beginning to feel a lot like on-call technician. The compliments that once felt like love began to feel like leverage. "You're the smart one" was no longer a term of endearment. It was the preamble to a request. It was the user manual for operating Camille. Say the magic words, and she will perform the task. "You're the smart one. Can you figure out why my quarterly tax estimates are so high? You're the smart one. Can you deal with this angry email from a client about shipping delays? You're the smart one. Can you just handle it?" My labor was meant to be invisible. The more seamless his business ran, the more successful he looked, and the less I was acknowledged as the architect of that success. He was the artist, the craftsman. I was just the Wi-Fi. You don't notice it when it's working, but you scream at it when it's down. The influence of his friends, especially Jerome, provided the social reinforcement for his growing entitlement. Jerome saw marriage not as a partnership, but as an acquisition. A woman was an asset you locked down to make your life run more smoothly. I remember one summer cookout in our backyard. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal and cut grass, the sound of old-school R&B drifting from a speaker. I had spent the morning making my signature macaroni and cheese, a 7-cheese monstrosity that was legendary in our circle. I was shuttling bowls and platters from the kitchen to the patio table while Wesley held court by the grill, a beer in one hand, tongs in the other. Jerome came over and slapped Wesley on the back, a big, booming laugh erupting from his chest. He gestured with his beer bottle toward me as I set down a pitcher of sweet tea. "Man, you got it made," Jerome said, his voice loud enough for half the party to hear. "She cooks, she codes, she cleans. You got this woman locked in." I froze for a second, my hand on the pitcher. It was a joke, of course. Guy talk, but it landed with a thud in my gut. Locked in. Like a contract, like a secure asset. I looked at Wesley, waiting for him to push back, to say something charming like, "Nah man, I'm the lucky one," or "She's my partner, not my prisoner." He didn't. He just smiled, a wide, deeply pleased, proprietary smile. He took a long swallow of his beer and nodded slowly, as if accepting a profound compliment. "You know it," he said to Jerome, a quiet confirmation. He didn't see me watching. He didn't see the way his casual agreement turned the beautiful summer afternoon cold for me. I was not his partner. I was his prize. A multifunctional appliance that made his life look good. And the most terrifying part was the pride he took in it. He wasn't just enjoying the benefits of my labor. He was proud of his ability to secure it so completely. The idea that I was there by choice, by an active daily decision, seemed to have been deprecated and removed from his operating system. That memory became contaminated. All the early memories did. I remembered the night we celebrated the launch of his website. We went to a fancy restaurant in Fells Point, the kind with white tablecloths and candles. He raised his glass of champagne, his eyes shining. "To the future," he'd said. "To Wesley James Custom Carpentry." At the time, I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost brought tears to my eyes. We did it. But now, replaying that scene in my mind, I heard it differently. He toasted his business, a sole proprietorship. He didn't toast us. He didn't toast my work. I was not a co-founder. I was the free software that came with the hardware. A customer review, not a love letter. His gratitude had an expiration date, and we had long since passed it. The erosion was slow, a gradual grinding down of my status from partner to utility. And the worst part, the part that kept me up at night long before I heard the words on the speakerphone, was that I had allowed it. I had set the precedent. I had been so eager to help, so invested in his success, that I had coded myself into a corner, writing a program for my own erasure. The breaking point arrived on that gray Tuesday, carried on the back of his laughter. After he delivered the line, "Where's she gonna go?" the world didn't shatter. The house didn't shake. The plate in my hand didn't fall. Instead, a profound and terrifying stillness descended upon me. It was the feeling a developer gets when they've been chasing a ghost in the machine for weeks, a bug that corrupts data in subtle, untraceable ways, and then suddenly, they see it. The one line of misplaced code, the faulty logic, the flawed assumption that explains everything. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even heartbreak. Not in that first moment. It was clarity. A pure, cold, and absolute clarity that was almost peaceful. The thousands of little grievances, the tiny paper cuts of disrespect, the casual dismissals, and the unacknowledged hours, they all snapped into focus. They weren't random events. They were symptoms of a single foundational bug in the system. He did not see me as an autonomous being. He saw me as a resource. My presence was not a gift he cherished, but a service he was entitled to. I stood in the guest room, a folded undershirt in my hands, and I could hear them still talking, their voices muffled again now that the crucial data had been delivered. They had moved on to something else. The game. The weekend. My entire existence had been defined and dismissed in a single sentence, and for him it was just a passing comment, a bit of locker room talk. I finished folding the laundry. I put his shirts in his drawer, mine in mine. I walked into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, my movements steady and deliberate. My body felt strangely calm, as if it had been waiting for my mind to catch up. The constant, low-grade anxiety I had been living with for years, the hum of trying to be enough, of trying to keep the system running smoothly, it just stopped. The machine had been powered down. He walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, phone in his hand, smiling. "Hey," he said, kissing the top of my head. "Jerome says hi." "Hi, Jerome," I said, my voice even. I didn't look at him. I just stared into my cup of tea, watching the steam rise. "What you thinking about?" he asked, opening the refrigerator, oblivious. The casual intimacy of the question was suddenly grotesque. I took a slow sip of my tea. In my mind, I was already drafting the project plan, the exit strategy. It would not be loud, it would not be dramatic. It would be a quiet, methodical decommissioning of a failed system. He thought my world was small and that I had nowhere to go. I was about to show him that my world was the one I was about to build, and it didn't require his permission to exist. The first step was writing the code for my own departure. My quiet preparation began that night. A software engineer doesn't just delete a program. She plans a migration. You assess dependencies, you back up critical data, and you execute the plan in phases to minimize system-wide disruption. My life with Wesley was the legacy system. My new life was the cloud server I was migrating to. Phase 1 was reconnaissance. That evening, while he watched TV, I sat on the couch with my laptop, the picture of domestic normalcy. He thought I was catching up on work emails. I was researching apartments in Mount Vernon and Federal Hill. I looked for buildings with secure entries and month-to-month lease options. I made a spreadsheet comparing rent, amenities, and move-in dates. He glanced over once, saw the columns and rows, and grunted. "Still working? You're a machine, babe." "Just finishing something up," I said. He had no idea the project I was finishing was us. Phase 2 was securing the new infrastructure. I found a perfect one-bedroom apartment in a converted factory building with huge windows and exposed brick. I took a virtual tour during my lunch break the next day and signed the lease digitally. I opened a new bank account at a different bank and set up an automatic transfer for a portion of my paycheck. I rerouted my personal mail to a new P.O. box. I was building a firewall, separating my data from the shared network. It was a clean, logical process, and the methodical nature of it kept the grief at bay. I was too busy executing tasks to feel the full weight of the demolition. Phase 3 was the phase data migration, the slowest and most dangerous part. I started moving my life out of our house one bag at a time. It began with small things he would never notice. The books I kept on my nightstand went into my work tote bag and came with me to the office, where I stored them in a box under my desk. The next day, it was my expensive running shoes and workout clothes. Then, a box of sentimental items from my childhood that I kept in the back of the closet. I took a different route home from work each day, dropping a single box or bag at my new apartment, which was still empty save for a growing pile of my carefully curated life. Each act of removal was a quiet declaration of independence. Taking my grandmother's jewelry box felt like reclaiming my history. Packing my favorite coffee mug felt like reclaiming my mornings. It was a strange reverse nesting. I was unmaking a home. During these 2 weeks, Wesley was a ghost in the machine, a user completely unaware that the system was being shut down around him. In fact, he became more affectionate than he'd been in months. He seemed to sense a shift in my energy, but he misinterpreted my quiet distance as contentment. He mistook my methodical detachment for peace. One night, I was on my laptop, transferring the last of my personal financial data to my new, secure accounts. I had just paid the deposit and first month's rent on my apartment. The transaction was complete. I was officially, financially, a resident of 2 worlds. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders, resting his chin on my head. He smelled like the wood polish he used in his shop. It was a smell that once meant comfort, and now just meant Wesley. "You're my world, you know that?" He whispered into my hair. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He was saying this to me while I was actively, methodically, and irrevocably leaving him. He was declaring me his world in the very moment I was proving I was not. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I just kept my eyes on the screen, my hands steady on the keyboard. "Camille?" he said, his voice a little softer. "Everything okay?" I closed the laptop slowly. I turned and gave him a small, empty smile. "Just tired," I said. "Long day." He accepted it. Of course he did. My fatigue, my moods, my silences, they were all just weather patterns to him, inconvenient but temporary. He had no idea this was a climate change event. He kissed my forehead and went to bed, and I sat there in the dark living room, the glow of the screen illuminating my face, feeling like a spy in my own life. The migration was almost complete. All that was left was to power down the old server for good. The day I chose for the final exit was a Saturday. Wesley and Jerome had an all-day fantasy football draft, an annual ritual of male bonding and cheap beer. It was perfect. He left in the morning, cheerful and oblivious, kissing me goodbye at the door. "Wish me luck," he said. "Gotta build a championship team." "Good luck," I said, my voice betraying nothing. I watched him walk down the street, and it felt like watching a character in a movie I was no longer in. As soon as his car was out of sight, I began the final phase. There was no frantic packing. It was a calm, orderly process. I had already moved the soul of my life out of the house. All that was left was the body, the bulk of my clothes, my toiletries, my laptop, my work monitors. I had hired a small moving service, 2 guys in a van, under the pretense of taking old furniture to a donation center. They were efficient and asked no questions. I walked through the house one last time. It looked the same, but felt fundamentally different. It was like looking at a website that had been replaced by a static landing page. The functionality was gone. My presence, which had filled every corner, had been surgically removed. The closet was half empty. The bathroom counter was cleared of my things. The bookshelf had gaps where my novels used to be. My absence was now a character in the story of the house, a quiet, unignorable ghost. I thought about leaving a long letter, a detailed explanation, a list of grievances, a final report on the system failure. But that would have been an appeal. It would have been an invitation to a debate. And there was nothing left to debate. The data was in, the conclusion was reached. He didn't need an explanation. He needed to understand that I had heard him, that his casual, confident dismissal of me was the only piece of information that mattered. I went to his home office, the one I had set up for him. On his desk, next to the sleek monitor I had helped him pick out, was his keyboard, the tool he used to answer emails from clients I had brought him through the website I had built. I picked up a pad of yellow sticky notes, the kind we used for grocery lists and reminders. I took a black felt-tip pen. My hand was perfectly steady. I wrote 3 words. I heard you. I peeled the note off the pad and pressed it firmly onto the space bar of his keyboard. It was the last command I would ever enter into his system. Then I walked out the front door, leaving my key on the hall table. I didn't look back. The temperature of my new life was glacial, but it was also clean. It was the clean, cold emptiness of a server that has been wiped, ready for a new operating system to be installed. One of my own design. The first text started around 8 o'clock that night, just as I was finishing assembling a new bookshelf in my blessedly empty apartment. The first one was simple. Hey, you home? I ignored it. 5 minutes later, where are you? The house is weirdly empty. Silence. Another 10 minutes. The discovery. What the hell is this note? I heard you. Heard what? Camille, call me. The phone rang. I looked at his face on the screen, a picture of us from a vacation years ago, smiling on a beach. We looked happy. We were happy. I silenced the call. The escalation began. The initial shock curdled into anger and accusation. A wall of text messages appeared, each one a little more frantic, a little more self-pitying. This is insane. You can't just leave a stupid note and disappear. You're being so dramatic. Whatever I did, we can talk about it. This is immature. After everything I do for you, for us. You just walk out? The irony of that last one was breathtaking. Everything I do for you. He had it completely backward. He was the sun, and I was just a planet in his orbit, reflecting his light. The idea that I might have my own source of energy was inconceivable. I didn't respond to any of it. My silence was a firewall. It blocked his access. His words, which used to have the power to wound me, were now just packets of data, unable to find their target. The next day, he recruited his allies. My phone rang, and it was Jerome. I almost didn't answer, but I knew I had to. I needed to close that port, too. Cam, he said, his voice oozing with a practiced, friendly concern. Hey, what's going on? Wes is a mess, man. He's over here, hasn't slept. He's torn up. I'm sure he is, I said, my voice flat. Look, he told me what happened. He feels terrible. You know, he was just talking. Guys talk. You can't take that stuff seriously. He was just bragging, you know? Bragging about what, Jerome? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You know, about you. About how solid you guys are. That you're his rock. That you're not going anywhere. It's a compliment, Cam. There it was again. The fundamental misunderstanding. My permanence was a compliment to him. It was a testament to his power, his desirability, his ability to have me locked in. It had nothing to do with my happiness or my agency. Thank you for calling, Jerome, I said. But this is between Wesley and me. Just talk to him, he urged. He loves you, girl. Don't throw all this away over one stupid sentence. The sentence wasn't the disease, I replied, the words coming to me with perfect clarity. It was the diagnosis. I hung up before he could respond. That night Wesley called again. I let it ring twice, then answered, putting it on speaker. I needed my hands free. I was organizing my new kitchen. Camille, he said, and his voice broke. He was crying. It wasn't the angry, frustrated crying of the texts. This was the raw, panicked sound of actual loss, the sound of a man who has walked into a room and found it empty. Camille, please, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I know what I said was stupid. It was the dumbest thing I've ever said. I continued placing my coffee mugs in the cupboard, one by one. Please talk to me, he begged. You can't just throw away 10 years. I love you. I paused. I leaned against the counter. I had to give him this. I had to hear him out, if only to confirm my own decision. Why did you say it, Wesley? I asked. He sniffled, trying to regain control. I don't know. I was bragging. You took it out of context. I was bragging to Jerome about how solid we were, how I knew I had a woman who would always have my back. That's all it was. I set my last cup down before speaking. The sound was a soft, definitive click against the shelf. It was the mic drop line the universe had handed me, a perfect correction to his flawed logic. You weren't bragging about us, I said quietly. You were bragging about your control over me. The line went silent. I could hear his breath ragged and uncertain. He had no response. He had offered an excuse rooted in his own ego. I was bragging, and I had handed him back the truth, rooted in my own humanity. The excuse was about how he wanted to be seen. The truth was about how he had seen me, and in that chasm between the two, our marriage had died. I need to go, Wesley, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. Not with pity, but with the finality of closure. Don't do this, he whispered. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm just catching up to a decision that was made a long time ago. Goodbye. I ended the call. The first few weeks in my new apartment were an exercise in reclaiming my own code. For years, my life had been a series of nested if-then statements, all dependent on Wesley. If Wesley is stressed, then I need to be calm. If Wesley has a big order, then I have to drop everything and fix the site. If Wesley's friends are over, then I need to play the happy, accommodating hostess. My own needs, my own desires, were buried under layers of conditional logic that always prioritized him. Now, there were no conditions. There was just me. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a clean one. It was the sound of a blank text editor waiting for the first line of a new program. I bought a ridiculous, oversized armchair in a shade of deep teal, a color Wesley would have hated. I placed it by the huge window overlooking the city. I spent hours there, just reading, or coding, or doing nothing at all. The resolution was not a dramatic, overnight transformation. It was a gradual rebuilding. I started a project I had been thinking about for years, a small open-source application designed to help people manage their personal projects and goals. It had no client, no deadline, no payment gateway. Its only purpose was to exist, to be elegant, and to work. Coding for myself was a revelation. The familiar frustration of a stubborn bug was still there, but it was different. It was my problem to solve on my timeline for my own satisfaction. The joy of finding the solution, of watching the program compile and run perfectly, was mine alone. I wasn't fixing someone else's business. I was building my own world. I was reclaiming the very skills he had taken for granted and using them as tools for my own liberation. My friends, who had watched my light dim over the years, rallied around me. Maya, my friend whose wedding I'd almost missed, brought over a bottle of expensive wine and a box of Thai food the first weekend. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just hugged me and said, "It's good to have you back." We talked for hours, and I realized how much of myself I had edited down, curated for Wesley's consumption. With my friends, I could be the full, uncompiled version of Camille. I didn't date. I didn't even think about it. The goal wasn't to replace the system, but to learn to live without it. The goal was to become my own infrastructure, to be the server and the user, the developer and the client, to find a wholeness in myself that didn't require external validation. My vindication wasn't in his suffering. I didn't know if he was suffering or not, and I found, to my great surprise, that I didn't care. My vindication was in my own peace. It was the quiet joy of a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, my fingers flying across the keyboard, building something beautiful for no one but me. About 6 months after I left, I saw him. It was inevitable in a city the size of Baltimore. I was at a small coffee shop in my neighborhood, one he would never have gone to, too artsy, not enough televisions. I was working on my project, deep in a flow state, when the bell over the door jingled. I glanced up, and there he was. He looked ordinary. That was the most shocking thing. The man who had occupied the entire landscape of my life for a decade was just a man. He looked thinner, and there were shadows under his eyes. He wasn't the monster I had built up in my head, nor was he the charming man I had fallen in love with. He was just Wesley, a stranger with a familiar face. Our eyes met across the room. A flicker of panic crossed his face, followed by a deep, weary sadness. He hesitated, then walked over to my table. "Camille," he said. His voice was quiet. "Wesley," I replied, closing my laptop. "You look good," he said. It wasn't a line. It felt like a genuine, surprised observation. "I am good," I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever said. There was no malice in it, no triumph. It was a simple statement of fact. I sold the business," he said, looking down at his hands. "The site kept crashing. I didn't know how to fix it." I just nodded. There was nothing to say. The system had failed because its chief architect had resigned. It was the natural, logical consequence. "I get it now," he said, finally looking at me. "What you meant. About control. I just thought you were happy." "I know," I said. And I did. His crime wasn't malice. It was a profound, catastrophic failure of imagination. He simply couldn't imagine a world where I had my own. He lingered for a moment, as if hoping for something more. An argument, a tear, an absolution. I offered none of them. I just sat there, a calm and quiet island of my own making. He eventually gave a small, defeated nod. "Well, good to see you, Cam." "You too, Wesley." He walked away and out the door. I didn't watch him go. I opened my laptop and went back to my code. I felt no anger, no sadness, just a vast, quiet distance. He was a piece of legacy code from a previous version of my life, a version that was no longer supported. It's easy to think of love as a fortress, something you build once and then inhabit for the rest of your life. But that's not what it is. It's a living system, a complex, collaborative code base that requires daily maintenance from everyone with commit access. You can't just write your part and walk away. You have to constantly review the other person's code. You have to run tests. You have to be willing to refactor entire sections when they're no longer working. For years, I was the only one submitting patches, the only one managing the updates. Wesley had stopped committing to the project long ago. He was just a user, complaining when the interface was slow, completely oblivious to the crumbling architecture underneath. He didn't lose me because of one sentence. He lost me over 1,000 unwritten lines of code, 1,000 ignored bug reports, 1,000 moments where he chose his own comfort over the health of the system. A relationship built on the assumption of permanence, rather than the daily act of choosing each other, accumulates a fatal kind of debt. Eventually, the cost of maintaining the broken system is higher than the cost of starting over. My departure wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of creation. I didn't tear down our life. I deprecated a broken build and started fresh. This time, the foundation is solid because I am the one who laid it. This time, the code is clean. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.